Well, hello, and let's do a little bit of populism, which is kind of teased throughout this second chapter in your book. You should probably have already seen a little video on immigration and urbanization, and hopefully my voice sounds a lot better here on this Wednesday afternoon. And you can see me here in my in my natural environment in my office at Northview Middle in Hickory. But when you look at populism, look at the little subheading I put on there, also known as the beginnings of people's politics in America, because in a lot of ways it is. And you're going to see this term. It gets thrown around a lot in politics today. Oh, he's a populist candidate. Well, guess what? Politics has changed over the course of the 240 something years of this country, and populism is part of that outgrowth of this idea of democracy taking on a much bigger role. So, if we're talking about populism, we've got to go back to socialism for just a second, which is another political hot potato that gets thrown about these days. But we're not talking about this modern version of what may or may not be. We're talking about the old school Karl Marxist sort of outgrowth of socialism as an economic system. And then when you look at this definition, a theory or system of social organization that advocates the vesting, the ownership, and the control of the means of production and distribution, blah, 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 in the community of the whole. Basically, what you're looking at there is the government's going to control far more than the laissez-faire, hands-off that we saw in last week's readings and last week's lectures. So socialism is where the government's going to control more, okay? And it's a very logical outgrowth at the time. I'm not a socialist, but when you look at the logic of what they're asking for and you compare it to what was going on at the time, it is at least a logical outgrowth, okay? Now, and there's a second part here, procedure of practice in accordance with this theory. That's right, you have to act on that theory, and that's what's going to happen to a lot of countries. In Europe in particular, in America, it's going to wax and wane a little bit, but in Europe in particular, you're going to get countries that are very socialist oriented. It's not necessarily a bad thing. So don't think of it as good and bad. Think of it more as different ways to deal with situations that countries find themselves in. Okay. And then I put in here about Marx's theory of the states following capitalism. We're not worried about that unless, people become followers of Karl Marx. And that's like, oh, this is like an intermediate step. We're going to go from capitalism to socialism to full-blown communism. Well, that's not what we're dealing with during this time period. But the socialist piece is something we do need to know about. Now, so what I've got here is you see this this is the late 1800s version of a meme, and the pitchfork people at the door. I mean, in 1892, populism is going to begin to rear its head on the national stage in terms of politics, and the discontent grows with Congress. Now, imagine that, in the 21st century, but what happens is Congress likes to make money. This is in a time before income tax. So how do they make money? There's a couple of ways. One, they raise tariffs or taxes on imported goods. Second, they sell land. Not a whole lot of land left to sell, though they're going to come up with some fun ways, as we saw in the chapter on the West. But this increase in a tariff actually causes prices to go up. And if you're a farmer, you don't want prices to go up. The prices of things you need, manufactured goods, raw materials like that. You don't want those prices going up because that costs you more money. What you want going up is the prices of the things the commodities that you make, which that's not what we're talking about. So these tariffs mess with the farmers. Okay, and so what you end up with is an almost protected market. You hear it with the American steel industry today. They want all these tariffs on foreign steel. Not arguing whether it's right or whether it's wrong, but in the late 1800s, late 19th century, those big business create big profits and they have a protected market, and it feels like if you're the farmers that it's on your back. They're making this money off of you. Okay, and so in the election of 1890, okay, you've got the election of 1890, which is a little midterm job here. Republican membership in Congress drops. That's interesting because since the Civil War, the Republicans have been the dominant party. Democrats, which have been the party of the Confederacy at that time, okay, and then there's going to be some flipping and flopping on this later, but the number of Democrats increases. So you have these more, conservative elements. The Republican, members drop. Anyway, you cannot really conflate it with today's Democrat and Republican parties. It'll cause you headaches trying to do it, okay? So the Republican Big Business Party is going to be what you see is them starting to slide, and the Democrat membership in Congress starts to increase. If you are big business, this is scary. Okay, and then you got 9 members of the Farmers Alliance. Now you're going, what is that? Never heard of that. Well, they're coming. That's part of this populist movement. Okay, so you got 9 members. They're not Dems. They're not reps. They are members of the Farmers Alliance. This should tell you this thing's a pretty big deal. Okay. And so in that election, you can look at that map behind me if you want to stop or you want to pull out the PowerPoint for the week, you can do that. But Democrats, what they want to do is to seize on this anti-tariff sentiment. They want to take back the White House. There it goes, right there. They want to take back the White House, okay? And so they nominated a man by the name of Grover Cleveland. There's a little town in the edge of Cleveland County, right on the South Carolina line, named Grover. That is named for this man because he is going to become the first Democrat president since before the American Civil War. Okay, Republicans, they're going to stick with Henry Harrison there, and the idea is that they want that high tariff platform. Well, it's already causing big problems. You're going to see different major issues in this country throughout your life, and when one really ticks off a huge portion of the population, the big parties tend to, if they don't drop it, they tend to minimize it. Well, not the Republicans, because boom, here we go, high tariff platform. All right. Grover Cleveland Democrats anti-tariff platform. And you're thinking, what in the world? Anyhow, so the populist, it's a coalition of farmers, the West and the South. Okay? One thing, I've never heard of them winning an election because they don't. But they become very important because they start to swing elections back and forth. Look at that. Look at me move right there. They start to swing them back and forth. And they nominate this guy, General James Weaver. I mean, it doesn't matter if you ever remember him again. No big deal because he doesn't win. But they are nominating presidential candidates and vice presidential candidates. You already see they've got 9 seats in the House. I mean, this isn't something fly-by-night organization. All right, so why does this election become important? Well, you've got something that we're going to see over and over again in American history, and that is where one segment of our population is so disgusted with the unfairness of the economy, they become politically active. People get mad, they start to vote. Okay, I want y'all to remember that. Some of you here are very young. Some of you are probably not old enough to vote. Some of you may be older than I am and vote all the time. Those of you that are you've seen this over your life. Those of you that are very young, you keep an eye out on this. You get a big percentage of the population mad and ticked off, and they will vote. Okay, and third parties usually do not find a lot of traction in American politics, but this one does. Matter of fact, this one changes the course of national politics for both parties. And so while they never win an election, what ends up happening is they're enough of a force to get their stuff into major party platforms. And some of it we know that we live with today. And you're going, wait a minute, that was from back then? Absolutely. Okay. So that their platform. Good grief here. I'm not going to read all that to you because you can download the PowerPoint, but you look at that top one. Free coinage, it should say free coinage, not free silver. Looks like I hit the delete button. I didn't mean to. At a rate of 16-1. What that means is they're going to not only back money with gold, they're going to back money with silver and gold. It's not just like Yukon Cornelius and the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer thing. Silver and gold, yeah, because there's more of it, which means you got a bigger money supply, which is inflationary, which means money is worth less. And when it's worth less, it's easier to repay debts. That's a big farmer thing, yeah. Number 2, a graduated income tax. If we're going to have an income tax, the poor are going to pay a smaller percentage, the rich are going to pay a greater percentage. Bet you've never heard that before in American politics, have you? Then you take these massive utilities. Today it might be like, electricity production or whatnot. Back then, it's the telephone, okay, and the telegraph and the railroads. They want the government to own them. Part of that socialist thing, right? Then, sub-treasury system. I'm not boring you with that. But popular election of senators. Today, we elect our senators directly. That was not always the case. It used to be your state legislature elected or selected them. Term limit for the president. Yeah, we do that today too. Wasn't always that way. You could run more than once. And we're going to see a president. You could win more than twice. And we're going to see a president who does that during the 1930s and 40s. an 8-hour workday, the idea of the secret ballot when you go vote, nobody sees how you vote. I mean, these are things that we look at today and go, well, duh. Back then, this is radical, and this is what they're proposing, and these are going to make their way into the American polity. All right. So what happens is 1892. You get these various little recessions, depressions, whatever you want to call them, and there's a labor unrest in 1892, and all of a sudden, if you are an Andrew Carnegie or J.P. Morgan or a John D. Rockefeller, and you own all these manufacturing things, it looks like there's the real possibility that the farmers and these workers, if they join forces, we're in trouble. Okay, we're going to be in trouble because if they join forces against us, they can force us to pay them more to do things for them that are just not something that people who want to make a whole lot of money really want to do. Okay, and so 1892, you end up with the Homestead Strike right outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I've driven by this the old Homestead Mill, 10,000 acre steel mill. I've driven by it 100 times. I mean, it's not there anymore. It's an entertainment district called the Waterfront now. But it is this massive, massive steel mill. And people going, the workers go on strike, and Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick, who becomes really one of the bad guys in American history, they send in, basically this private army, these Pinkertons, and they crush the strike and they kill, the people die in the streets. Remember, there are still signs in that town to where people died, into actions that happened during this. And finally, the Pennsylvania governor calls in what we would call the National Guard. You know, it's so interesting to me on one hand that it's like, man, we're calling out the National Guard for this. On another, it's like, how sad is it that these things are happening? So you get that labor unrest background plays to the Populist Party. The Populist Party are feeding off of it, whereas the Democrats and the Republicans are over in la la land somewhere. You know, until this happens, they become very scared of it. And how can we repress it? Why is this not want to do its thing? There, no, now, sorry about that. Had a little minor technology glitch there for a second. So what happens is they do begin to contend seriously in the presidential politics. You look at all the votes. They got a little over a million, 22 electoral votes. I mean, that's more than some conventional presidential candidates get. But the very areas you would think they would do well in those eastern and urban areas, they don't. Um, those people are they're a little harder sell than the farmers are. And then you have Southern African Americans or blacks who are disenfranchised by these Democrats. Sometimes you may see them called Bourbons. I can't remember if the Yelp calls them that or not. But these people are very afraid of two groups. They're very afraid of poor black voters. Well, that's been the case since the end of the Civil War. But the Democratic Party is also scared of poor white voters. Now, that's not something you usually see. But that's exactly right, because what happens is the poor whites and the Southern blacks kind of see themselves. Wait a minute, hold on, we're in the same boat here. Our skin color is a little different, but we're in the same economic boat and the same political boat, and that's not going to work. So they become afraid of them too, and you can't have them organized. Again, you imagine all these groups coalescing together, and they could change the way American politics look, and that's scary for people who are in power. All right. And so you need to think about these. You get a million black farmers that are threatening to unite with white workers at the polls. You could have a problem on your hands. I mean, you imagine you double that vote total, and now all of a sudden you've got three parties in Congress. Maybe you have a presidency that has to go to the House in order to be elected. This is spooky stuff in the late 19th century to certain elites. Okay, so how do you stop that? Well, if you're a conservative white elite, Henry Clay Frick and Andrew Carnegie, the Democratic politicians in the South, you play on racial antagonisms. Can't have this. There's going to be equality. See, to us today, here in the 21st century, we hear stuff like, what is your major malfunction? Well, you hear it back then, and that was a scary thing because that was brand new, and it was like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? So you play on that. You play on those racial antagonisms. right? And so what happens is then, after the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, 13th ended slavery, the 14th gave free African American citizenship, 15 gave black males the right to vote. Well, you're going to start to see that being systematically shut down by these Jim Crow laws. Literacy test. I used to have a copy of the Alabama literacy test, and again, I've got a bachelor's in history, a minor in political science, a master's in history, uh, a couple of books in publication. I can't pass it. I mean, nobody that I really know can. I mean, you'd have to be some kind of weirdo to be able to do it. And so that keeps a lot of people out. Then there's a poll tax. You got to pay money to vote. Then the grandfather calls. Oh, if your grandfather couldn't vote, then you can't. Oh, my God. But that and intimidation at the polls. I mean, even thinly veiled versions of the KKK coming out and about and trying to intimidate certain groups from not voting. Um, and it's very effective. And that's unfortunate, but it is very effective. And so what happens as a result? Well, Grover Cleveland gets elected office. Only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. He's going to get elected once, then get voted out, and then get voted back in, which is exactly what Donald Trump wants to have happen right now. Okay, well, it's not unheard of in American politics. All right, so I put on here, it's the same old Cleveland, a very different country. The problem is that debtors are up in arms. It's harder and harder and harder to repay stuff. I read an article today about how credit card debt and stuff is the highest that it's ever been. It's rising, percentage wise, much higher than it was even last year, 2 years ago. Defaults on car loans are rising. You're seeing a little of that pressure right now. So, what is the Cleveland presidency? Now, first, we got to start off with one of the funniest things. You see this woman over here with the baby? That's not Grover Cleveland's wife, but that baby's his. And one of the things that they used, it was a big scandal. Oh, huge scandal back then. One of the old sayings was, "Ma, ma, where's my pa?" Going to the White House, ha, ha, ha. I mean, that's a problem. So Grover Cleveland's not squeaky clean. Okay, there you go, Grover. So we look at the Panic of 1893, and again, at that point in time, it was the most devastating economic downturn this country had ever seen. Now, of course, that's going to be eclipsed in the 20th century, but at this point, it was the biggest, and it's the first large-scale depression of this new second industrial revolution economy, this age of steam and steel and technological development, and all of a sudden, it goes belly up for a few minutes. You look at the number of businesses that collapse in the urban class. Oh my goodness, you got gangs. I've got here gangs of unemployed workers who are having to be aided by charities, and oh my god, it's not workable. We're going to really see that come to a head in the with the Great Depression in 1929, where there is no entity big enough to handle the needs besides the federal government, and that changes a whole lot of things that the populist would be very happy with, but people at the time would find incredibly radical. So what are those causes? Well, overbuilding, overspeculation, which causes a lot of downturns all the time. Okay, something looks like a good get rich quick scheme, and it doesn't work out. So you have overbuilding, overspeculation, ongoing agricultural depression. Then there's questions about American credit abroad. We're not going to worry with that, okay? But European banks do start to call in loans. I mean, banks don't loan you money to not get it back. Okay, so you've all these things going on, and it's like, man, they coalesce at one point, and bam, you end up with a panic or a depression. So these threats to the gold standard, man, think about it. We got a big old bar of gold there. If anybody wants to bring me one, I'll be happy to take it off your hands. But as gold begins to be depleted in the Treasury, okay, then they want to repeal that Sherman Silver Purchase Act. We don't want it to be backed by silver and gold because the value of the dollar fluctuates so rapidly. Anyway, so we're going to keep going through this because I'm going to bore you with that too much. But as the depletion of the gold reserves continues, okay, there's one point in time you could go to the bank, take your green paper money, and redeem it for gold. You can't do that now. It doesn't work that way. You could somewhat when I was a child back in the very early 70s up until about 72, which means I was really wearing training pants, but whatever. But you could, all right. And so people are going to do it because gold is real money, hard cash right there. Okay, and you look at the gold reserves dropped to $100 million. That's below what they call the safe minimum. Now, $100 million then is not the same as 100 million a day. That may be 100 billion. I mean, I would have to do the math on it, and it would take me a while. But during those debates, you got this new guy, William Jennings Bryan. He's called the Boy Orator of the Platte. Read a great book on him in grad school called The Godly Hero. He's young, 33. He's a congressman from Nebraska, and he wants this free, Nebraska being a state of farmers, he wants that free silver to continue. So he's going to make all these different speeches, including his very famous Cross of Gold speech, which is he harkens himself as a Christ-like figure, which I'm like, okay, you have to back off there for a second. But as more and more currency is cashed in, those gold reserves drop from 100 million, which is already people going, oh my goodness, to 41 million, which is about like the gas light coming on in my car. It's time to go get some gas. Here in this case, it's time to fill those reserves back up. So what happens is Grover Cleveland floats these bonds, okay? And it's going to, you bring your gold in, we're going to give you some paper money, we're going to give you these certificates, blah, blah, blah. You just bring it back. But it doesn't work, because who wants that piece of paper when you know that gold in reserve is dwindling? All right. So what happens is something that you could not see today. J.P. Morgan, who was the richest man in well, at least in America, if not the world, the man who bought Carnegie Steel for $500 million, is going to loan the government money. Today, there's nobody rich enough. You could get all the rich people together. You couldn't loan the government enough to last, half a day. Here, he's going to loan them money. So now all of a sudden there's this cries of who really controls this government. All right, we're not going to worry about Cox's army in the Pullman strike. We're just not going to do it because this thing's getting a little long anyway. So tariff and tax policy under Cleveland are going to be very exciting, as I've said here. And you get a couple of bills again trying to protect domestic industry. Okay, and what you see are the Republicans doing it. Democrats want to make good on the campaign promise to enact moderate protection. So the McKinley tariff is not going to be like the tariffs we had seen before. And you look here, it leaves us with a $61 million deficit. I mean, our government today can get that in a day. But it leaves them with a $61 million deficit, which at that time was really unheard of. Those numbers should not get in the red, okay? And so the thing's drafted 2% income tax. And here comes the fun, people, because we are in income tax season right now. And it contained a 2% tax on incomes over $4,000. That's like making a few $100,000 today. And so you get a group of people that it's socialistic, it's communistic. Oh my gosh, what are you doing? If you can tax us that much, you can tax us more. Which those are arguments that are going to be thrown around for years. Okay, and they're going to add 600 plus amendments, which it really acts like the modern Senate. And Cleveland's going to sign it, but it's going to be a mess. And then all of a sudden, this income tax is going to be found unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. When it comes time for me to file, I'll be like, oh, where's that Supreme Court at? But what they found was it violated the provision of direct taxation by the federal government, and it's going to take an amendment in 1913 in order to pass income tax. So wait till we get there. It's not going to be that long. I want you to see it. That's going to be something I'm going to throw up for you to see. All right, so these money issues are going to dominate politics, and that idea of the free coinage of silver, we've been through that before. Let's get through here real quick. And William McKinley, we know he becomes president, we know he gets voted in. He had a good military record. He served in Congress. He was represented from Ohio, which used to be the cradle of the presidency. But he was called by his party the advance agent of prosperity and the Napoleon of protection. Sounds good to me, even though he's going to get assassinated. And Marcus Alonzo Hanna is the guy behind him. He's kind of cool because he says the function of government is to aid business. He's very, very, very Hamiltonian, as I've got up here. And he's really the power behind this throne. And he funds that campaign. And you follow the money and you're going to find the power. Okay? But one of the things he endorses is that gold standard. But in the meantime, William Jennings Bryan's going to come on, and this guy's not dying until the 1920s, so we got a little while to deal with him. And so the Democratic Party drops Cleveland at this time. He dropped him like a bad habit. And they wouldn't endorse the current thing in the current administration. I'm sorry, it's kind of hard for me to talk some today. And so they become a party without a leader. So this William Jennings Bryan, he takes the stage. He's now finally old enough to run for president by this time. And he gives this cross of gold speech. He talks about the gold standard is evil. He said, you shall not crucify mankind upon this cross of gold, or push down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. I mean, this man is a true Christian believer, and he's using that imagery here: cross of gold, crown of thorns. So the boy orator, the Platt, he has a great voice. He's not the smartest guy, but he's a good man. Do not get me wrong. So he gets nominated. He goes to all the 16-1, all the stuff we saw in the populist platform before. But what ends up happening is you see that when the amount of silver in $1 is about 50 cents worth, you have some serious inflation going on. You have some serious devaluation of the dollar. That's going to be a problem. So what happens is, the Democrats steal that issue, and anyway, let's move. Let's move on. Let's don't even go here, okay? So in that election, there's Brian. You see the imagery there. He gives a stump tour. He goes 18,000 miles, 500 to 600 speeches. I can't even get through a day at school and then do this right here without it sounding like a cross between Elmer Fudd and Kermit the Frog. But he gives 500 to 600 speeches. We don't really know how many he gave. So anyway, he's striking fear into the Eastern conservatives. It's going to be a problem. And what it does is it threatens, in their mind, to convert their holdings into 50-cent dollars overnight. Your net worth just quite literally dropped in half. Your buying power quite literally dropped in half. And so that's going to be a scare there. And so Hanna, remember him, the guy who's behind McKinley, he talks about this. He said it's silver lunacy. He says, Lord, if we do this is going to ruin our economy. And, they raise 16 million to the Democrats 1 million, a rate of 16-1, which is kind of funny when we think about the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. But again, McKinley runs the old Standard Front Porch campaign. He stays in Canton, Ohio. People come to him. Reporters come to him. Whereas William Jennings Bryan's all over God's creation, doing his thing, 500 to 600 speeches. And so what you see is elements of modern campaigning, along with elements of traditional campaigning. All these pamphlets, I don't know about y'all, I'm getting a zillion in my mailbox all the time, okay? You see signs everywhere. That did the same thing back then. And so what we're going to end up with is business and industry rallying behind McKinley, because he's going to allow them to maintain their profits with it. At least that's the idea. Whereas William Jennings Bryan is going to see all of this, this buying power, all of this wealth go away, and good gosh knows what else they might do. Now, look at that last bullet, and you can't see part of it because of my little picture down here. But some employers telling workers, don't come in if William Jennings Bryan wins. And if you win, we're going to pay you 50 cents on a dollar, because that's all a dollar is going to be worth. Which clearly, in our day and age, is illegal. But that's what they were telling them. And this is at a time when you didn't have a whole lot of recourse. There was no social media. There was no national media campaign that you could go to and tell them this. So all of a sudden, when you need every quarter in your pocket, this is scary right here. And that's exactly how Hanna and the McKinley campaign spooked their way to victory. And so of those elections, so McKinley wins an electoral vote of 271 to 176, which is not as lopsided as it might appear. Okay, it's just not that lopsided at that time. And you look at that popular vote, 7.1 to almost 6.5 million. This was pretty close, which shows you the impact that the populists are going to have during this time. So McKinley sweeps the industrial East, which makes sense after what we've seen. The industrial Midwest, which is those parts of Ohio and maybe Indiana, Michigan, and whatnot, and that upper Mississippi Valley, whereas Bryan runs strong in the areas you would think. In the West, the South, and the agricultural Midwest, or what I've got called the Trans-Mississippi West. All right? So what happens is William Jennings Bryan is pretty popular, just not quite popular enough to win. McKinley's popular, but, looking at it from a certain point of view for all the wrong kind of reasons. All right, so what happens here, the McKinley area and the Republican ascendancy. I just like this picture in the background of this woman beating McKinley with a with an umbrella. I think it's pretty cool. Um, we're about done here. So anyway, there's going to be a 16-year GOP occupation of the White House after the whole Grover Cleveland thing going on back and forth and back and forth. And some people call it a fourth party system, or what we call 40-year spans with an overall characteristic. Kind of crazy. I think you're living through one. What's it going to be at the end? I don't know. But it's the end of the Democratic Republican equilibrium and of the Gilded Age, and now we begin a period of Republican ascendancy that does not get undone until 1932, and then it comes back in 1952, and then we get some craziness in the late 20th century. So what happens to McKinley at the helm? I mean, he's conservative, he's safe, he does a good job. I mean, I can't say a whole lot against the man. I mean, honestly, I love to cut on politicians. Okay, he makes a lot of deals. I've got here he's a consummate politician, but those deals, I tell you, Bill Clinton was like that. Bill Clinton, a lot of people, didn't like, Bill Clinton called him Bubba and all that, but Bill Clinton could cut a deal with the best of them. And McKinley is a lot in that same vein. Hey, you know what? I'm going to get some of what I want. You can get some of what you want. We're both going to move forward. That's the essence of American politics, or at least it used to be. Now, today, there's no telling. All right, so last piece here. So it's tariff and monetary. Don't even worry about that tariff bill, except to understand that it's going to charge it at 46.5%. Okay, that's nearly a 50% tax on things that come in. Don't care that you know the name of it, just know that it happened. And that's what we've got going on during that time. Now, that's nothing like what we're going to. Today, it doesn't look that way, but it did then, trying to protect that domestic market. In that depression there, it began in 1890s. It begins to wane. It runs its course. Prosperity begins to resume, which is the way these things usually do, until we get to the Great Depression, and then there's a host of reasons why it doesn't do it. Okay, and of course, when the economy's good, when you're in office, you got to take credit. So the Republicans take that credit, right? We come back onto the gold standard. You get the Gold Standard Act in 1900. We get rid of that whole silver thing. All right. So the monetary supply is going to be stable and, quote, safe. Okay. Paper currency, turn it into your bank, get you some gold if that's what you want. If you want to carry around that heavy stuff all day, you do it. But you're sitting there thinking, well, how can the economy grow if the money supply can't grow? Ding, 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 right here. New discoveries of gold. And as more gold comes into circulation, the more money that the countries that have it can take care of and can send out, and new ways to process it. I mean, you know what? Technology has a way of making things work, and that's what happens in 1900. And so the free silver movement at that point is going to end. We're not going to see it for a long, long time, and when we do see it again, it's in a very different